Jabari was a poor fisherman who lived in a small riverside village where life was slow and simple. Every morning, he would wake before sunrise, cast his fishing net into the wide river, and hope for a good catch to feed himself and his aging mother. The river was both his livelihood and his escape, a place where he found peace amid the struggles of his humble existence. Though he had little, Jabari never complained. He believed in hard work, patience, and the words his mother always reminded him of: kindness brings unexpected rewards. His mother, frail but wise, had raised him alone after his father passed away when he was just a boy. She would often tell him stories of fate and destiny, of how the gods had a way of shaping the lives of men in ways they could never predict. Jabari listened, but never imagined that his life would be anything more than what it was: fishing in the mornings, selling his catch in the village market, and returning home before nightfall. Beyond the quiet village, a mighty kingdom stood, ruled by King Jabari, a man once known for his strength, but now remembered for his sorrow. Many years ago, his only daughter had vanished without a trace. Some believed she was kidnapped by enemies of the throne, while others whispered that she had drowned in the great river, lost to the currents forever. The loss had shattered the king, and though he ruled with wisdom, a part of him remained broken, his heart always searching for the child he had lost. The people of the village had spoken of the missing princess for years, but to Jabari, it was just another tale, something distant and unrelated to his world. He had no connection to kings or palaces, only to the river and the simple life he knew. Unbeknownst to him, fate had already set a path he could not yet see, one that would change everything he had ever known. The night was restless, the air thick with the scent of rain, as dark clouds gathered over the river. Jabari had stayed out later than usual, hoping to catch a few more fish before the storm arrived. The river, usually calm and welcoming, had turned restless, its surface rippling under the howling wind. As he pulled in his fishing net, a sudden flash of movement caught his eye. Something was floating downstream, caught in the current, moving dangerously fast toward the rocks. At first, he thought it was driftwood, but as the object came closer, his heart pounded. This was no piece of wood. It was a person. Without a second thought, Jabari threw aside his net and dove into the icy water. The river's currents pushed against him, but he fought through, his strong arms cutting through the waves. As he reached the figure, he saw her. A young woman, barely conscious, her delicate frame barely staying afloat. Her long dark hair clung to her face, and her clothes were torn and soaked, as if she had been drifting for hours. Gripping her tightly, Jabari swam back to the shore, dragging her onto the muddy riverbank. She wasn't moving. His breath caught in his throat as he placed his ear close to her mouth, relief washing over him when he heard the faintest sound of breathing. She was alive. He shook her gently, calling out, but she remained unconscious. It was only then that he noticed something on her wrist, a golden bracelet, gleaming even under the stormy sky. It was unlike anything he had ever seen before, crafted with intricate patterns that seemed too delicate, too refined for an ordinary villager. The markings looked important, almost royal. A strange feeling crept into his heart, but he pushed the thought aside. Whoever she was, she needed help. Lifting her into his arms, Jabari carried her back to his small hut at the edge of the village. The rain had begun to pour as he entered, his mother gasping at the sight of the unconscious girl. Without hesitation, she rushed to prepare dry clothes and warm water. Jabari placed the girl on a mat near the fire, watching as his mother gently wiped the dirt from her face. Even in her weakened state, there was something striking about her, something that felt out of place in their simple home. As the storm raged outside, Jabari sat beside her, watching her chest rise and fall with shallow breaths. Who was she? How had she ended up in the river? The questions swirled in his mind, but for now, only one thing mattered. She had survived. Whatever secret she held, whatever past she had escaped from, she was safe. At least for tonight. The morning sun crept through the cracks of the hut, casting a golden glow over the small space. The scent of herbs and warm porridge filled the air as Jabari's mother sat beside the unconscious girl, gently dabbing her forehead with a damp cloth. Jabari had barely slept, his mind restless with questions. Who was she? How had she ended up in the river? And why did she wear a bracelet that looked like it belonged to someone of great importance? A soft groan broke the silence. The girl stirred, her eyelashes fluttering before her eyes slowly opened. Confusion filled her gaze as she took in the unfamiliar surroundings. She tried to sit up, but a wave of dizziness made her fall back onto the mat. Jabari's mother leaned forward, her voice gentle. "You are safe, child. Do not be afraid." The girl's lips parted as if she wanted to speak, but hesitation clouded her face. Finally, she whispered, "Nyah. My name is Nyah." Jabari exchanged a glance with his mother. The name felt unfamiliar, yet something about it carried weight. But beyond her name, she could remember nothing. Not where she came from, not how she ended up in the river, just an empty void where her past should have been. Over the next few days, Nyah recovered, slowly regaining her strength. Though she was dressed in the simple garments of a villager, her grace and mannerisms were unlike anyone in the village. The way she carried herself, the way she spoke, even the way she instinctively arranged the cloth on her lap, it was as if she had been raised among nobility. Jabari's mother, wise in her years, noticed these details and whispered her suspicions to her son. "She is not like us, Jabari," she murmured one evening as Nyah sat outside, watching the river. "Her hands are soft, untouched by hard labor. Her speech is measured, like someone who has been taught how to speak properly. And that bracelet. I have seen something similar once, long ago, when I was a young girl visiting the capital." Jabari listened, but said nothing. He had noticed these things too. He had also noticed how some villagers had begun to whisper. Strangers did not simply appear out of nowhere, and their people were wary of the unknown. Some questioned where she had come from. Others wondered if she brought misfortune. Jabari did his best to shield her from their suspicions, but he knew it was only a matter of time before the whispers turned into something more dangerous. Far away in the grand palace, King Jabari sat in his chambers, staring at an old portrait of his daughter. Years had passed since her disappearance, but his heart refused to accept that she was gone. Every day, he sent search parties. Every day, he hoped. Yet no trace of her had ever been found. The kingdom had begun to move on, but the king never did. Unbeknownst to him, within the palace walls, a dark scheme was unfolding. The royal minister, a man named Sefu, had spent years ensuring that the princess never returned. He had gained influence in the absence of an heir, and the longer the princess remained missing, the closer he came to seizing the throne for himself. In secret, he bribed informants and silenced those who still searched for her. If she were ever found, he would make sure she never reached the palace alive. The kingdom would be his, no matter what it took. And so, as Nyah struggled to piece together her past in the quiet village, the forces that had once torn her away from her family were already moving against her once more. The royal announcement echoed across the kingdom, reaching even the quietest corners of the land. King Jabari, his heart filled with both hope and sorrow, had officially declared a royal search for his missing daughter. Any person, noble or commoner, who found the lost princess would be richly rewarded beyond imagination. A messenger was sent to every village, every town, and every hamlet, spreading the word. Jabari and his mother had heard the announcement, and though it stirred something within Jabari, he didn't share his mother's growing concern. To him, the idea that Nyah might be the lost princess seemed impossible. She was just a girl who had washed up on the riverbanks, someone with no memory of her past. But deep down, there was a quiet part of him that couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to her story than what met the eye. As the days passed, Nyah began to experience strange flashes of memory. brief, fragmented visions that seemed to come from nowhere. One moment, she was sitting by the fire, staring into the flames, when she saw a grand palace, an immense structure with golden walls, towering spires, and 1,000 servants. She could almost smell the perfumed air of the palace courtyard, hear the sounds of laughter and music. Another memory was even more vivid. Her mother's voice, soft but commanding. "Nyah, my dear, you are the future of this kingdom. You must always remember who you are." The voice was warm, loving, and yet it carried an urgency, as if something terrible was about to happen. Nyah's heart raced as the memories started to grow clearer. She could almost picture her mother's face, the way she had smiled at her with such affection. But then, something darker pierced the memories. A figure, cloaked in shadow, standing in a palace hallway. Betrayal, a moment of terror, the sound of rushing footsteps, and then, an attempt on her life. The memories overwhelmed her, leaving her gasping for air, tears welling in her eyes. She ran to Jabari's hut, where he and his mother were preparing a simple meal. In a voice tinged with both fear and confusion, she poured out the fragments of what she had remembered. I remember a palace," Nyah said shakily, her voice trembling. "I remember my mother. She loved me. But there was someone there. Someone who wanted to hurt me." She wiped her tear-streaked face, the confusion still evident in her eyes. "But I don't understand. How could I be the princess? I have no memory of it. No one would believe me." Jabari listened carefully, his heart heavy with doubt. He had never seen her act as though she was royalty. She had always been humble, kind, and unpretentious. "Nyah, I don't know what to say. You might have been a princess, but you're here now, with us. You're safe." He paused, trying to understand. "But I don't think you're meant to go back to a life of crowns and thrones. You belong here, with us." Nyah shook her head, her confusion growing. "But what if I am the princess? What if my father is still searching for me?" Before Jabari could respond, a sharp knock on the door interrupted them. Jabari opened it, only to find a royal soldier standing at the threshold, his uniform crisp and adorned with the royal insignia. The soldier looked past Jabari to Nyah, his eyes narrowing for a moment before he stepped forward. "You are the one," the soldier said, his voice both authoritative and uncertain. "You resemble the missing princess, Nyah. The king has sent us to search the villages, and we have come to find you." Nyah froze, her breath catching in her throat. The soldier's words seemed to pull the very foundation from beneath her feet. She staggered back, her heart racing as memories flooded her mind in a rush. The palace, her mother, the betrayal, and now, this soldier who had come to take her back. Jabari stood in stunned silence, unable to reconcile what he was hearing with the girl he had come to know. Was Nyah truly the lost princess, or was it all some cruel twist of fate? The questions swirled in his mind, but there was no time to answer them. As Nyah's hidden memories began to resurface, she stood before the soldier, uncertain whether to embrace her past or continue to live the simple life she had found. As the news of Nyah's possible return to the kingdom spread, it reached the ears of a man who had long been waiting for the day when the princess would never come back. Minister Seifu, a man driven by greed and ambition, knew that Nyah's return would threaten his carefully crafted plans to seize the throne. He had already made his moves to manipulate the royal court, securing his place as the most influential man in the kingdom. But if the princess were to return, all of that would be in jeopardy. Seifu had been the one to orchestrate the disappearance of the princess years ago, ensuring that she was hidden away and kept from the kingdom's eyes. Now, with the possibility of her resurfacing, his worst nightmare was coming true. His position and dreams of power were at risk. After receiving word from his spies that Nyah had been found in the village, he wasted no time. He ordered his men to capture her, but not alive. The princess had to be silenced, and her return to the palace was something he could not allow. A bounty was placed on Nyah's head, a reward large enough to motivate anyone in the kingdom to bring her down. Jabari had been working in the fields when the rumors reached him. A sense of dread settled in his chest as he pieced together the truth. Nyah was in grave danger. Minister Seifu's orders were clear. No one could stand in the way of his ambitions, and Nyah was the only thing standing between him and the throne. He knew that as long as she was alive, there would always be a chance for the kingdom to fall into rightful hands. Her hands. Jabari's heart sank as the realization hit him. The peaceful life he had tried to offer her was no longer an option. "Nyah," Jabari whispered, his voice tense. "You're not safe here. We need to leave now." Nyah, who had been sitting by the fire, looked up, confused. "Leave? Why? What is happening?" Jabari's eyes darkened as he explained the growing danger. "The minister knows you're alive. He wants you dead, and there's a bounty on your head. We have to run." Nyah's breath hitched as the weight of his words sank in. She had never imagined that something so terrible would happen just because of her return. Her life, once taken for granted, was now the most precious thing to those who wanted to control the kingdom. Before they could act, the village chief came to visit them. Jabari felt a flicker of distrust as the man entered their hut. The chief, who had always been respectful, now seemed unusually nervous. He quickly informed them that soldiers were searching the village for Nyah, following the orders of the king's court. But what Jabari didn't realize was that the village chief had already betrayed them. He had secretly informed the royal soldiers of Nyah's whereabouts, motivated by his own fear of Seifu's wrath. "You must leave immediately," the chief said hurriedly. "The soldiers are on their way. You have no time to waste." Jabari's suspicion flared, but there was no time to question him further. He grabbed Nyah's hand, his voice urgent. "We're leaving now." The village chief stepped aside as they fled from the hut, but his gaze lingered for a moment too long, betraying his true loyalties. Jabari, however, was already focused on their escape, his mind racing as he led Nyah through the back alleys of the village. The forest was their only hope. They couldn't stay here any longer. With soldiers closing in on them, Jabari and Nyah rushed toward the dense, dark forest that lay just beyond the village. The trees towered over them, the thick canopy of leaves blocking out the sun. The forest, full of danger and wild creatures, was the last place anyone would think to look for them, and Jabari was certain it was their only chance to evade capture. With every step deeper into the forest, Jabari's heart raced. The sounds of the village were quickly replaced by the eerie silence of the woods. Nyah's footsteps were light but quick, her breaths shallow from the sudden rush. She had no choice but to trust Jabari completely, knowing he was their only hope. They both understood that escaping the soldiers and the minister's men would not be easy, but it was their only option if they wanted to stay alive. As Jabari and Nyah ventured deeper into the forest, the shadows grew longer and the atmosphere heavier. The sounds of the village faded behind them, replaced by the rustle of leaves and the distant calls of creatures. The dense trees seemed to close in around them, creating a cocoon of silence that, despite its safety, felt ominous. They had been running for hours, and fatigue weighed heavily on their bodies. Yet, the urgency of their situation drove them forward, each step taken in haste, each glance cast nervously over their shoulders. Nyah's mind was a whirlwind of emotions, fear, confusion, and now, strangely, fragments of forgotten memories. As they trudged through the underbrush, something within her seemed to awaken, as though the forest itself was pulling the veil from her mind. Her past, once buried in the depths of her soul, began to emerge in vivid flashes. Images of a grand palace, her childhood laughter echoing through royal halls, and a dark, menacing figure who lurked in the background of her memories. Her thoughts were interrupted by a sudden pause in her step. Her eyes widened, her breath catching in her throat as a chilling image flashed before her eyes. The face of the minister. His cold eyes filled with malice as he stood over her, his hand gripping a dagger. She gasped, the truth rushing back in an overwhelming flood. The minister, who had once been a trusted advisor to her father, had plotted to kill her when she was just a child. His ambition had known no bounds. He had feared that the rightful heir to the throne would stand in his way, so he'd devised a plan to rid himself of the princess. The treacherous minister had orchestrated a scheme that involved throwing Nyah into the very river where she had nearly drowned all those years ago. Her heart pounded in her chest as the full truth finally settled in her mind. The betrayal had been more than just an attempt on her life. It had been an effort to strip her of everything. But the river had not claimed her life. Somehow, miraculously, she had survived. The memories of the cold water, of struggling to keep afloat, began to merge with her more recent memories of waking up on the riverbank in Jabari's arms. As they continued their journey through the forest, Nyah struggled to process the magnitude of everything that had happened. She had been living in darkness, unaware of her true identity, but now, as the pieces fell into place, the weight of her past settled over her like a heavy cloak. "Jabari," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I remember everything now. The minister, he tried to kill me. He threw me into the river to drown, to take the throne. That's why I was left for dead." Jabari stopped in his tracks, his heart heavy with disbelief and concern. He had known that Nyah's past was filled with mystery, but this revelation was far beyond anything he had imagined. The danger she had been in, the evil she had narrowly escaped. It all made sense now. "We have to stop him," Jabari said, his voice filled with determination. "We have to make sure he never harms you again." As they made their way deeper into the wilderness, they stumbled upon a small clearing. In the center, an ancient weathered hut stood, its wooden walls covered in vines. The air was thick with the scent of herbs and earth, and a quiet, peaceful aura seemed to surround the place. A figure appeared at the entrance of the hut, a wise old hermit with long graying hair and piercing eyes. His gaze seemed to see right through them, as though he had known their arrival long before they had even reached the clearing. The hermit studied Nyah for a moment, and then, with a slow, deliberate motion, he spoke. "You are the lost princess," he said, his voice hoarse but filled with certainty. "I have been waiting for you." Nyah gasped, her hand flying to her chest. You know who I am." The hermit nodded. "I do. I have seen the signs. The kingdom has long been without its rightful ruler, and the land has suffered because of it. But now, the time has come for you to return." Tears welled in Nyah's eyes as the hermit's words sank in. For years, she had felt like a ghost, haunted by the loss of her identity, by the emptiness of her forgotten past. But here, in this forest, with the hermit's words, she felt something stir within her, a flicker of hope, of power that had long been dormant. The hermit continued, his eyes fixed on Nyah. "If you wish to reclaim your throne, you must go to the king. Only he can restore what was lost. But be warned, your path will not be easy. The minister will not let you return without a fight." Jabari, ever loyal and protective, stepped forward. "We'll do whatever it takes to bring her home." The hermit gave a solemn nod. "Then go to the king. Show him who you truly are. It is the only way to defeat the minister and take back what is rightfully yours." With the hermit's guidance, Nyah and Jabari felt a renewed sense of purpose. The journey ahead would not be without its challenges, but Nyah knew that she could no longer hide from her true identity. She was the princess, the heir to the throne, and it was time to face the king and the man who had tried to destroy her future. The battle for her kingdom was about to begin. Jabari and Nyah had spent days preparing for this moment. They had traveled far and wide, disguised as simple travelers, their faces covered by cloaks and their belongings packed in the most inconspicuous way possible. The capital, with its towering spires and bustling streets, now seemed like a distant world compared to the forest, where they had hidden for so long. But Nyah knew that she could no longer avoid her destiny. The time had come to return to the place that should have been her home, to the palace where she had once been a beloved princess. As they approached the palace gates, the nerves that Nyah had kept buried deep inside her began to resurface. Her heart raced with a mix of excitement, fear, and uncertainty. What if her father didn't believe her? What if the minister's machinations had already sealed her fate? But there was no turning back now. The gates loomed ahead, guarded by soldiers who seemed to recognize them immediately, though they did not yet know who they truly were. The royal capital had long been on high alert, ever since rumors spread that the lost princess might still be alive. The palace had been a place of mourning for so many years, and now there was the faintest glimmer of hope. But Nyah knew that her return would not be easy. She had made powerful enemies in the form of the treacherous minister and his loyal followers. As they approached, the guards hesitated, eyeing them warily. They were about to question them when the sound of hurried footsteps approached from behind. A sharp whistle sliced through the air, and before they could react, a group of assassins emerged from the shadows, their blades gleaming with deadly intent. The minister had found out that Nyah was alive, and he would stop at nothing to see her destroyed. Jabari immediately stepped in front of Nyah, drawing his own knife with lightning speed, his instincts taking over as he defended her. The battle that followed was swift and brutal. Jabari fought with all his might, his every move fueled by the desire to protect the woman he had come to love. Nyah, although frightened, was no stranger to danger. She grabbed a nearby stick and swung it at the nearest assassin, her eyes burning with determination. The clash of steel rang out in the still evening air as Jabari and the assassins exchanged blows. Nyah's heart pounded in her chest, but her focus remained on one thing: getting to the king, revealing the truth, and ending the minister's reign of terror. With every swing of Jabari's blade, the enemy was pushed back, but the battle raged on. They were outnumbered, but not outmatched. It was at that moment that the palace gates opened and a group of royal guards rushed out to join the fray. With the added support, Jabari and Nyah fought with renewed strength, the assassins quickly overwhelmed. The minister's plot had failed, but they still needed to face the most important challenge ahead: convincing the king of Nyah's true identity. After the final assassin fell, Jabari and Nyah stood together, breathing heavily, their clothes torn and stained with the marks of battle. The palace gates creaked open further, and Nyah's eyes were drawn to the massive courtyard beyond. Standing in the doorway, watching with a mixture of disbelief and hope, was King Jabari. His regal figure was draped in the finery of his station, but his face was weathered with years of sorrow and loss. His eyes, once dull with grief, now flickered with something else, recognition perhaps, or a deep yearning. He stepped forward, his gaze fixed on Nyah, who stood trembling, her heart pounding with the weight of the moment. The king's eyes scanned her, and then his gaze fell upon the golden bracelet on Nyah's wrist, the same bracelet that she had worn for as long as she could remember. It glimmered in the fading sunlight, royal markings that matched those of the palace itself engraved on its surface. "Where did you get that?" the king asked, his voice strained with emotion. Nyah's voice quivered as she answered, I am your daughter, your majesty. I am Nyah." The king's eyes widened in disbelief. For years, he had mourned the loss of his daughter, and here, standing before him, was the girl who had once been his pride and joy, the child he thought he had lost forever. But there was no denying the truth that lay before him. The bracelet was proof enough. But how? The king's voice cracked, and for a moment he seemed lost in his own emotions. "How did you survive?" Nyah took a deep breath, steadying herself for the hardest part of all. "I was betrayed. The minister, he tried to kill me. He threw me into the river to drown, but I survived. I've been living in hiding ever since. But now I've returned to reclaim what is mine." The king's face hardened as the truth sank in. The man he had trusted, the minister who had stood by his side for so many years, was responsible for the suffering of his daughter. He had allowed ambition and greed to cloud his judgment, to plot the murder of the very heir to the throne. The king turned to the royal guards, his voice filled with anger and authority. "Arrest him! Bring him here at once!" Within moments, the minister was dragged into the palace courtyard, his face twisted with fear and rage. He had never expected this day to come, the day when Nyah would return and expose his dark deeds. But it was too late now. His fate was sealed. As the guards restrained the minister, the king turned back to Nyah, his eyes filled with regret and sorrow. "My daughter, I am so sorry. I failed you. I failed to protect you." Nyah, her heart heavy but filled with a quiet strength, stepped forward. "It's not too late, father. We can still save the kingdom." The king nodded, his resolve strengthening. Together, they would restore the kingdom, banish the darkness that had held it captive, and bring justice to the people. The final battle had been fought, not just against the minister, but against the years of sorrow, the betrayal, and the lies. The king embraced his daughter for the first time in years, a moment of reconciliation that marked the end of a long, painful journey. The palace gates, which had been sealed shut for so long, were finally opened once more, not just to Nyah's return, but to the hope of a new beginning for the kingdom. As the last of the minister's supporters were escorted from the palace, the mood shifted from one of tension to one of relief. The royal courtyard, once a place of grief and mourning, had become the setting for a new chapter in the kingdom's history. King Jabari stood beside his daughter, Nyah, his heart swelling with emotions he had long kept buried. The pain of years lost, the tears of a father who had mourned his child as if she were gone forever, were replaced with joy and gratitude. The king turned to Jabari, the humble fisherman who had risked everything to save his daughter. "You have done more than any prince or noble could ever do. You have returned my daughter to me, and for that, you will be rewarded as a hero." Jabari, though overwhelmed by the king's words, lowered his gaze in modesty. The fisherman had never desired wealth or power. His life had been content in its simplicity. "Your Majesty, I ask only for land," he said humbly, his voice steady. "Land to build a home where my people can live in peace. They have struggled for too long. That is all I seek." The king, taken aback by the generosity of Jabari's request, nodded solemnly. "You are a man of great heart, Jabari. You shall have your land, and you will be honored in the kingdom's history as the one who saved the princess." Though Jabari was offered gold, jewels, and titles, his heart was content, knowing he had done something far greater. He had restored a family, saved a life, and helped a kingdom heal from its wounds. His request for land was granted without question, and soon the once poor fisherman became the owner of fertile land that would provide for his people for generations to come. As for Nyah, now reunited with her father, she chose to stay in the palace, her rightful home, but her heart remained tied to the simple life that Jabari had shared with her. The palace, with its grand halls and opulent gardens, was a world she had once known, but had lost. Yet, she would never forget the fisherman who had pulled her from the river, giving her a chance at life. She often visited the village, bringing supplies and sharing stories with the people who had helped raise her. The kingdom rejoiced in the return of the lost princess. Festivals and celebrations were held throughout the land, and songs of Nyah's courage and Jabari's selflessness filled the air. The people of the kingdom knew that their rulers had been returned to them, but they also knew that true power did not lie in crowns or riches. It lay in the hearts of the people who fought for what was right. As the years passed, Nyah ruled beside her father with wisdom and compassion, always mindful of the lesson that had shaped her life. She never forgot the fisherman's kindness, nor the simple values he had taught her: humility, honesty, and the power of a selfless heart. The story of Nyah and Jabari spread far beyond the borders of the kingdom, a tale of love, loyalty, and redemption. And through it all, one truth remained clear. True kindness is always rewarded, sometimes in ways we never expect. It is the unseen gift that touches lives and changes the world, one small act at a time.